It is so nice to be with you this morning. I've been looking forward to this moment ever since Leanne and I did a tour of Tassie. We managed to get to every Baptist church in 1 week and filmed a little film from each one, just telling the story, and put it up on YouTube. And we were really touched just with the encounter with the crew here at Lower Barrington, just sharing some of the journey. And for me, one of the things just to let you know, I've only been a Baptist as long as I've been employed by the Baptists as a pastor down in Hobart. Before that, I was with the Christian and Missionary Alliance Church in Canada. And before that, I was with a mission organisation called Fusion. And so I've been trying to get my head around, okay, what are these Baptists and what do we believe? And one of the things I've loved seeing is that there is a spirit that somehow is in each church that has been, it's like God's been here the whole time, and there are themes that have carried through the life of the church even though that people haven't. And even just that, I was just reading about how singing has been a really important part of this church throughout its history. There have been barbershop quartets and all kinds of things that have been part of the journey of this church, and even hearing a bit of the story of the faith to build the place out the back, and hearing originally that John French and his wife and a whole lot of the women actually raised the money for the original pews by selling blackberries. There was always this sense, and we don't have the money to do it, but we know it's right, so we'll find a way and trust God that it'll work. And that's been a bit of the journey of my life too. I've been in ministry now since 1992, originally in Hobart, married Leanne. We've got 4 children. My dad, Mal, founded an organisation called Fusion. For a while he was one of the better known voices on Australian radio. He had a little syndicated radio program called Breakthrough Generation. I often would be travelling with him as a kid as he would speak to hundreds and hundreds of people. And before that, one of my earliest memories of Tassie was we lived in Sydney, but we'd come down every Christmas largely because my grandmother's family grew up at Wilmont, and they were led to faith by the Dyer family. And the Ambroses went on. My grandmother was an Ambrose, and they went on to start. My great grandfather sold clothes all around this district on a cart, and then founded the Ambroses clothing stores. And so my grandfather was the manager of Ambroses growing up before it went the way of many clothing chains, and I love, there was always this entrepreneurial spirit up here on the northwest coast. The family brought Coca-Cola to Tassie, so sorry about that. And they managed to sell it. There are so many stories in this part of the world of people who almost, make it big. And the family managed to sell Coca-Cola the year it made a surplus. So that was... we often talked about, would have been good to hang on to that. A lot of other. I think it's really important to know where you come from. It's really important to know where you come from. And what I love about what I have learnt about the Baptist churches is where we come from are very ordinary people who love Jesus and are committed to looking beyond themselves to the people across the road. And that's been true, I don't know if I was, of the Baptist movement right the way through. We've tried to, as I'm coming into the state leadership of the Baptists, we've tried to say, okay, what are we doing? What are we trying to do? And really, we've just tried to name that heart by saying, when Baptists are at their best, we just want to see Tassie transformed by Jesus. Through healthy, interdependent churches. Tassie transformed by Jesus through healthy, interdependent churches. And I actually think if it's true this church is going to be here in another 110 years' time, there are three things that we need to be able to talk about. One is where we've come from. One is where are we now, actually? Where are things actually up to now? And one thing is, what does it mean to hang on to Jesus now? Starting with where we came from, there's a passage that has really challenged me. Jeremiah 6:16. You see, as I said, I've come in from the outside to the Baptist movement, and I've learnt to really love the heart of the Baptist movement. There's something special about this commitment to we have the mind of Christ. And Jeremiah 6:16, I think, names part of our task in this moment. It's to say, one of the dangers can be, C.S. Lewis talked about chronological snobbery, where we think we know better than all the generations that have gone before us. Well, I actually think that we need to take Jeremiah seriously, where he says, this is what the Lord says. Stop at the crossroads and look around. Ask for the old godly way and walk in it. Travel its path and you'll find rest for your souls. I actually think there's a lot we can learn from people like John French and his wife, who apparently was a Salvation Army officer. I didn't even know that we had a Salvation Army officer who was right at the bedrock of this church. And that was part of the initial outreaches into Lower Barrington. That was fascinating for me to hear. Apparently they were quite a team. And of course for us, Chris and Maurice French have been a precious part of our lives, and Maurice, I miss him. He's been such an important part of us arriving back into Tassie. But as I've taken a journey of trying to understand the past, I think it feels like God gave me a little bit of a gift as I was coming into the state leadership of the Baptist movement. We discovered, I don't know if you heard of the fact that the Baptist Union in Tassie was founded by a family called the Gibsons. Have you heard that? And William Gibson had a Bible. They just found his Bible 2 years ago, and up the back of it there is, I don't know if you can even see this. I don't know if it's even going to work. I don't know if you can see that. They just found a sticker up the back of William Gibson's Bible, and on it is a church planting plan. It says, where Baptists cease to be aggressive, they die. Strengthen the home base, begin in Tasmania. And it says Hobart, Launceston, Sheffield. There's a few little dots around Sheffield, interesting enough. And this is long, long before this church was even imagined. And that where Baptists cease to be aggressive, they die. We won't adopt that as our state motto, I don't think. But it is interesting where that comes from. You see, William Gibson came to faith much later in life. It was his wife, Mary Ann Gibson, who was part of what they called a particular Baptist church. Do you know the first Baptist church in Australia started in Hobart? It is sadly now Europe Car Rentals. You can go there to the site of the first Baptist church. It is, and it had a sister church in Launceston, which Mary Ann Gibson was part of. And what the particular Baptists were about is that they call them hyper-Calvinists. What it meant by that is they trusted God was so much in control, there was no point telling anybody else about Jesus because, God's got it all covered. So let's just focus on ourselves. And they became little religious clubs. And both those churches died. But it was the writings of a man called C.H. Spurgeon. Have you come across him? Yes. Well, that changed Mary Ann's life. So much so that she sent her son across to London to meet Spurgeon. And and said, look, we've got to do something in Tassie. We've got to reach Tassie. And so she used her husband's money. 20 years later, he would get baptised, and it was clear. We've got a record of travelling pastors coming through and praying with Mary Ann for William. But she would use her husband's money. In fact, specifically, they would take a merino ram and sell it at the Sydney Easter show. And they would use the proceeds from that sale to fund the building of churches and paying for pastors who were handpicked by Spurgeon to come out to Tassie. And one of those churches is up the road here at Sheffield. And that where Baptists cease to be aggressive, they die, is actually a direct quote of Spurgeon, who said, the Christian church was designed from the first to be aggressive. It wasn't intended to remain stationary at any period, but to advance onward until its boundaries became commensurate with that of the world. The religious people didn't like Spurgeon much because he wasn't very religious. He didn't sound religious. He didn't go to the proper schools. He spoke in a way the ordinary people could respond, and he wanted people to know Jesus. And that was the heart that started the Baptist Union in Tassie, an absolute commitment to helping people know the hope that was in Jesus. And the first Baptist church started reaching out to their community by teaching people to read, because literacy back then was a problem. Turns out it still is. And they would provide blankets, and they would run community events, and they would find ways to reach into the Perth community, and soon hundreds of people were coming to faith. The reason this passage from Jeremiah haunts me is I haven't read the whole thing. At the end of it, it says, ask for the ancient paths, ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. And then it says, but you said, we're not going to do that. We won't walk in that. I was saying last night at dinner, Jesus tells a story about a sower, and often people have used it to talk about whether you become a Christian or not, but it's fairly clear it's not talking about that. It's talking about Jesus casting, or the sower casting the seeds of the news of the kingdom, and the first bunch of the seeds sort of bounce on rocky soil, just bounces off, and then the second bunch goes or bounces on road, then bounces off, then the next bunch is sort of rocky soil, and people have an emotional response to the gospel, but it doesn't go down deep. But I actually think the third group that Jesus talks about there, he says that the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desire for other stuff choke the word and make it unfruitful. I think a case could be put that we as the church are a bit unfruitful, if we're to be honest with ourselves. Do you know, Tassie is now the most secular state in Australia. There are more people who say they have no religion in Tasmania than anywhere else in the country. And why is that? Is that because we've all been faithful and everyone else there has got it wrong? Or is it possible that we as a church may have missed the boat a little bit? Is it possible that we might be saying at times, no, I don't want to do that? See, it's interesting. As I go around the churches, I can see there's a normal impetus to start by looking out, but then starting to focus on ourselves. I think that's a normal impetus in the church. And Jeremiah, it's before those verses in Jeremiah, it says, from the least to the greatest, their lives are ruled by greed. From prophets to priests, they're all frauds. It's a bit strong, isn't it? They offer superficial treatments for my people's mortal wounds. They give assurances of peace where there is no peace. I think one of the dangers for us in the Christian church is we can be telling each other, oh, this is wonderful. It's all okay. While the single mum down the street is just struggling to cope. She's desperate for hope. And we know where hope is found, but because we are so busy playing our own games, she's alone. I actually think part of the three things we need to do, the first thing is to rediscover the heart that was at the founding of the Baptist Union. The heart, just to tell people, I love people and tell them about Jesus and point them to where hope was found. The second is to face the truth of where we are now. I love when Paul writes to the Corinthians, he says, I'm writing to God's church in Corinth. Now, that not particularly, revolutionary, except for the fact, two things that I think we need to remember. This isn't our church. This is God's church. And this is God's church. If he was writing to you, it would be to God's church in Lower Barrington. To know we are here. And there is a community we are to serve. Who have real needs, real concerns, and a real need for hope. Tasmanians are desperate. Do you know, 11% of Tasmanians report having a long-term mental health condition. Do you know that the proportion of Tasmanians diagnosed with anxiety or depression increased from 21% in 2009 to 37% in 2022. And there's all kind of challenges we have. Like the fact that we as a state let one family take $208 million out of the pockets of families who could least afford it last year. And we reduced their tax rate from 25% down to 10% just because we were starting to talk about whether we ban pokies or not, or restrict the use of pokies or not. One family. And there are so many families that are doing it tough. I guess part of the question is, will we let our heart break for the stuff that causes God's heart to break? Will we care? What is remarkable about the history of this church started because people here looked around and said, there are people here who need hope. And the Sheffield district was amazing. It was a multi-site church long before anyone even thought to talk about being a multi-site church. It was an attempt to reach the local communities here and bring hope, and we have records of local people coming to faith in just the year after this church was planted. The focus wasn't on us, it was on them. And whenever Baptists are at their best, they are, in Spurgeon's words, aggressive, but not... Sadly, when we're not at our best, we're aggressive in the wrong sense. And apparently some of Baptist meetings can get a bit heated back in the day, but when we're at our best, we're aggressive in the right sense, in that we are reaching out beyond ourselves. And the third thing is, whenever we're at our best, we've got our eyes on Jesus. That's where hope is. It's not through our programs or plans or... I love... I kick up. We've just finished teaching on the book of 1 Peter at church down in Hobart, and 1 Peter 3:15, I reckon sums up the task. In your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. For Hebrew people, the heart is the will. It's not yet... Like for us, we think of hearts being your emotions. But in biblical idiom, or the way biblical writers thought, your emotions are actually in your bowels. A lot less attractive on Valentine's Day. But but your heart was the centre and source of your will. It was who you are. So what Peter's saying, in the core of who you are, in your decisions, trust and obey. In the core of who you are, trust and obey. And he says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope you have. And this is the challenge for me as I'm going around our churches. There's two presumptions in there. One is that a whole bunch of us have lots of friends who aren't part of the church, and the other is we're really so hopeful that it's unusual and a bit weird. And so people see something in us that they go, so why are you so hopeful? What is it about your life that means you're so different? And whenever the church has been at its best, that's been true. Christians have been weird. People have looked at them and said, why do you act like you do? Why do you love your enemies? Why do you give so much money away? Why do you act the way you do to people who aren't like you? But I wonder, I do wonder whether the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth and the desire for other stuff may have actually taken our eyes off Jesus. So we don't end up looking that different. We kind of look a bit like everybody else. When Baptists are at their best, they just love Jesus and love people. And there is this implicit challenge. One of the things I've discovered about Baptists is we set ourselves up for conflict. Because we say, no one can tell you how to think. That's a Baptist thing. The freedom of conscience and corporate governance. Together we have the mind. We say, no one can tell you how to think. And the other thing is, we have the mind of Christ. None of us individually has the mind of Christ. That together we need to work together to work out what God is saying. And as we do that, it's amazing. The world changes. It is nice to be able to report that it does feel like something's shifting. There were more people baptised in Queensland Baptist churches last year than ever in the history of the Baptist Union. There are people coming to faith left, right and centre. And I do think for us in Tassie there's this question. Are we just going to assume that the story is the world is moving away and it's their problem? Or are we going to be open to maybe seeing things a bit differently? Just in closing, one of my favourite passages is Hebrews 12. And it feels appropriate on this 110th anniversary. So I think Hebrews 12 comes after Hebrews 11, where it's told the story of the great heroes of faith. And I think as you look at the honour board there, the names on the walls, we've got our own great heroes of faith here at Lower Barrington. And it says, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. And for me, like my grandfather is one of those witnesses. I bet you for you can bring to mind some of the witnesses. People who are there in the stands. I know this isn't what the author meant, but I just imagine the MCG. Yeah. That's the kind of picture I have. They're there in the stands. And what the writer seems to be saying is, if you're not in the stands, you've still got work to do. Mm-hmm. It can be tempting to think, I'm getting a bit old, or I'm a bit young, or I just don't quite have the money I need, or whatever. I don't know. We all, at every stage of life, we manage to find our excuses. But I think what the writer of Hebrews is wanting to say is, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders. One of the obvious questions for you is, what holds you back? I don't know where you're up to with faith, but I do know this. I do know that you know the stuff that holds you back from being all that God calls you to be. And the writer of Hebrews, I love, Galatians says, it is for freedom that Christ set us free. Not to make us look religious. So let us actually throw off. And it's this process. The Bible calls it the process of sanctification. The process of getting freer. Of throwing off the stuff that holds you back. The sin that so easily entangles. I do think we in the church have got to learn to talk about sin in a more helpful way. Often we talk about sin as what other people do. And we kind of give the impression that to be a good Christian means you've got it all together. Well, to be a good Christian means you know you need grace. It means you know you don't have it all together. Like 1 John says, if you claim to be without sin, you might be in trouble. I just think we don't have it. We're not ever dumb enough to say it. We just kind of learn to put on a nice face with each other. The church has got to be a place where people can be real. If there's going to be any place where it's okay not to have it together, it has to be the church. Let us throw off the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. I love this picture. It's like a picture. For me, I did orienteering in high school. I wasn't very good at it.